Hello everyone, come back again with me Rani. Now in this occasion, I want to explain you about my assignment in subject stylistic. And then the title of my assignment is A Formalist Stylistic Analysis in William Ernest Henley's poem Invictus. So stay tuned. Now in the first time, I will tell you about the background of the author. Henley was born in Gloucester on 23 August in 1849 to mother Mary Morgan, a descendant of poet and critic Joseph Warton, and father William, a bookseller and stationer. William Ernest was the oldest of six children, five sons, and a daughter. His father died in 1868. William Ernest Henley, 23 August in 1849 until 11th July in 1903, was an influential English poet, critic, and editor of the late Victorian era in England. Written by William Ernest Henley, a great poet and critic, Invictus is a masterpiece of Stoic poetry. It was written in 1888 in his first volume of poems, Book of Verses. The poet shows the strength and endurance of a person who becomes a victim of unfortunate circumstance. Despite the conditions, the victim holds his head high and doesn't break down. Since its publication, it has become a very popular poem on account of its outstanding description, the speaker's positive attitude, and resilient nature. Okay, next we are going to a theoretical background. First one, formalist stylistic. Formalism, also called Russian formalism. Russian Ruski formalism, innovative 20th century Russian school of literary criticism. It began in two groups, OPOYES, an acronym for the Russian words meaning Society for the Study of Poetic Language, founded in 1916 at St. Petersburg in the latter Leningrad, and led by Viktor Skylovsky and the Moscow Linguistic Circle. Founded in 1915, other members of the groups include Archie Brick, Boris Eichenbaum, or Britannica. Formalism, the biggest thing ever to hit literary criticism, has had such influence that most English majors come to use it intuitively as sort of a first language. All those terms, like a metaphor, irony, point of view, matter, tone, are the basic tools of formalists. Close readings, Cowles in 7. Formalism assumptions have been questioned, its methodologies criticized, and its self-contradictions exposed to the point that it's now difficult to accept formalism fully on its own terms. Cowles 7. Although the formalists based their assumptions partly on the linguistic theory of Ferdinand de Saussure and partly on the symbolist notions concerning the autonomy of the text and the discontinuity between literary and other use of language, the formalists sought to make their critical discourse more objective and scientific than that of symbolist criticism. Allied at one point the Russian futurists and opposed to sociological criticism, the formalists placed an emphasis on the medium by analyzing the way in which literature, especially poetry, was able to alter artistically or make strange common language so that the everyday world could be defamiliarized. They stress in the importance of form and technique over content and look for the specificity of literature as an autonomous verbal art. They studied the various functions of literature as ways to separate poetry and fictional narrative from other forms of discourse. Although always anathema to the Marxist critics. Formalism was important in the Soviet Union until 1929, when it was convenient for its lack of political perspective. Later, largely through the work of the structuralist linguist Roman Jacobin, it became influential in the West, notably in Anglo-American New Criticism, which is sometimes called formalism. Okay, next, formalism is the formalist critic examines the form of the work as a whole with the form of each individual part of the text, or the individual skins and chapters. The characters, the setting, the tone, the point of view, the diction, and all other elements of the text which join to make it a single text. After analyzing each part, the critic then describes how they work together to give meaning or them to the text. Form is everything. The poet, for example, begins with an idea sort of sits in the imagination. The poet works with matter, symbols, image, tone, ideas, and other elements to help this seed grow into a finished poem. The poem's form or shape, inherent in the idea from the beginning, is individual and unique. Each poem takes its own shape, which depends on its own inner laws rather than on outside constraints. Coles 9. Okay, next we are going to the point of view. Point of view is the viewpoint from which you view the setting. To know who is the author, to know what is the pronoun, and some information about the poem. Depending on the powers the author has granted this narrator, you may even be able to see inside a character's mind, learning what he or she thinks and feels. Okay, next one, them. Them is the point of the poem or story, the author's message to us, the readers. Them is often complex, and thus it may be difficult for two people out of 10 to interpret the same theme. Next, we are going to the characters. Characters are the lifeblood of every text like story, poem, or novel, and some characters are more important than others. Characters may be round or more like real life with positive and negative traits, or flat, usually stereotypes that symbolize a certain type of person or place or thing. Characters may also be dynamic or changing and growing as the novel's events unfold, or static. It means those who remain unchanged no matter what happens to them. Next one, tone. Tone in written composition is an attitude of a writer toward a subject or an audience. Tone is generally conveyed through the choice of word or the viewpoint of a writer on a particular subject. Poetic and literary divines share similar attributes, but a few of them are exclusively used in poetry. There are some poetic divines. First one, stanza, rhyme, and then end. Stanza is a division of 4 or more lines having a fixed length, meter, or rhyming scheme. Stanza in poetry are similar to paragraphs in prose. Both of stanza and paragraphs include connected thoughts and are set off by a space. The number of lines varies in different kinds of stanza, but it's uncommon for a stanza to have more than 12 lines. The patterns of a stanza is determined by the number of feet in each line and by its metrical or rhyming scheme. Next, rhyme. Rhyme is a repetition of similar sounding words occurring at the end of lines in poems or songs. A rhyme is a tool utilizing repeating patterns that bring rhythm or musicality to poems. This differentiates them from prose, which is plain. A rhyme is employed for the specific purpose of rendering a pleasing effect to a poem, which makes it a recital an enjoyable experience. Moreover, it offers itself as a mnemonic device, smoothing the progress of memorization. Okay, the last iamb. Iamb is a unit of meter with two syllables, where the first syllable is unstressed and the second syllable is stressed. Words such as attain, portray, and describe are all examples of the iambic pattern of unstressed and stressed syllables. The iambs is one of the most fundamental metrical feats in English language and poetry. Many poets writing in straight meter choose to write with many successive iambs to create a consistent rhythm of unstressed and stressed beat. We will see some of these types of consistent meter below in more depth. Iambic tetrameter, a line with 4 iambic or 8 syllables total, less common than the other metrical forms containing iambs. Okay, next we are going to the analysis, but first, before going on to the analysis part, let us start with an initial interpretation of William Ernest Henley's poem Invictus, which reads as follows. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever God may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell cloud of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried loud. Under the bludgeonings of change, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strict the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Okay, we are going to the analysis. First one is the point of view. Point of view is the viewpoint from which you view the setting, see the authors, observe pronoun, and some information about the poem. You can use this question. First one, who is the author? The author of this poem is William Ernest Henley. William Ernest Henley was an influential English poet, critic, and editor of the late Victorian era. The next question, when Invictus poems read? Invictus written in 1875 and famous in 1888. And then the last question, what is the pronoun of the poem? The pronoun that used in Invictus is first person. First pronoun, I. For example, I thank whatever God may be in line 3. And then I have not winced nor cried aloud in line 6. Next one, them. Them is the point of the poem or story, the author's message to us, the readers. And then the them must logically come from the text, therefore the them must be supportable by using specific text example. You can use these questions. First one, what ideas does the author want me or the reader to learn from this poem? The idea of the themes of the poem comprises talk of an adult whose life is overwhelmed by misery and pain. However, he knows that the best means of combating these situations is a strong will. He further says that his miserable life cannot conquer his soul, as he is not afraid of the challenge and sufferings. He remains positive, composed, unbold, and unafraid in every difficult situation. His optimism makes him the master of his fate and the captain of his soul. The next one, characters. For the characters, you can use this question. Who is the characters of this poem? The character of this poem offers very few hints as to the speaker's identity. In some sense, it's meant to be general enough to apply to anybody's life, which has contributed to its enduring popularity. This is a poem meant to be able to inspire anyone. One reason we might relate the poem to Henley's own life is its consciousness of the body, as is clear in line 6. After all, Henley read the poem while undergoing treatment for tuberculosis of the bone. To assume Henley himself is the speaker of the poem is unnecessary, however, and the poem always used the body in a highly metaphorical manner. Okay, next question. Where the setting happened? Invictus has no clear setting because almost all of it is meant to be taken metaphorically. However, its language does create metaphorical or psychological space that the poem passes through. Look at, for instance, the night or hell that the poem comes out of in the first stanza, which becomes as big as a word. This hell looms again in the third stanza, this time as a literal hell in the distance. Okay, next. Tone. You can use this question for tone. What is the tone of Invictus? The tone of Invictus as a representative of adversity. This poem is about the positive attitude and survival of a person who remains tenacious and undefeated no matter how unfavorable the situation is. Okay, next one. We are going to analysis of the literary device in Invictus. Analysis of the literary device refers to specific literary techniques poets and writers use to convey their message. Okay, the analysis of some literary device used in this poem is given below. First one, metaphor. Henley has used 3 metaphors in the poem. First, the title of the poem Invictus represents pain. The second metaphor is used in the first line as out of the night that covers me. Here, night represents dark times and hardships of the poet. The third metaphor is in the third stanza. Looms but the horror of the shade. Here, shade refers to unseen future or upcoming challenges. Next, personification. Personification is used to attribute human characteristic to an inanimate object. The poet has personified night in the first line of the poem, such as out of the night that covers me. Night stands for the suffering that troubles him. The second example of personification is used in the second stanza under the beginnings of change, as if the change is human who can be hit by someone. Next, imagery. The use of strong imagery in the poem enables the reader to feel the writers. Henley has used image appealing to the sense of sight, such as black is the pit, my head is bloody, and beyond the place of wrath and tears. This image help the readers to feel the pain and courage that have helped the speaker to overcome his misery. Assonance. Assonance is the repetition of the vowel sounds in the same line, such as the sounds of and u come in quick successions in black S under the beginnings and M master, M captain. Consonance. Consonance is the repetition of consonant sounds such as the sound of P in pit from pole to pole. F sound in finds and shall find me unafraid. and B sound in bloody but unbuoyed. Similar. A similar is a device used to compare two different objects to understand meanings by comparing these objects' qualities. There is one similar used in the second line of the poem where it states that black as the pit from pole to pole. He compares the darkness of night with his dark and hopeful life. Alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of the same consonant sounds in the same lines of the poetry, such as the use of P sound in pit from pole to pole and F in finds and shall find me unafraid. This use of alliteration here has brought musicality in the poem. Agnosticism. Place the speaker's response to adversity within the context of God's uncertain existence. This uncertainty about the God, a view known as agnosticism, contrasts with the speaker's faith in self-empowerment. The first stanza used both the words God and soul, immediately suggesting that the speaker wants to, in some way, engage with religion. Yet each engagement comes with uncertainty. For instance, rather than saying God as what a traditionally Christian speaker in this context, the speaker says whatever God may be. Not only does this throw God's existence into doubt, it also raises the possibility of other non-Christian divinities. Where were these speakers to say instead, I thank God for my unquenchable soul? We might have classified this poem, at least at the beginning, as a prayer or a devotional poem. That said, even as it is, the poem retains some aura of prayer. Next one is enjambment. It gives flow and continuity to the poem where the same idea runs without any punctuational marks. Similarly, in this poem, the third line of each stanza runs into the fourth without any appropriate functions. For example, and yet the meanest of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. The enjambment in Invictus work very intuitively. Line breaks happen at natural pauses and help establish a clear conceptual relationship between the two lines in the questions. In the lines 3 and 5 and 4, in line 4, the speaker introduced the act of thanking and who gets thanked, that is the God. The line 5 details exactly what the speaker is thankful for, that is their unconquerable soul. A similar case happens in lines 9 and 10, where line 10 serves to complete the description offered by line 9, what is beyond the wrath and tears, the looming horror of the shade. This is use of enjambment pushes the reader to keep going in order to complete the thought, much as the speaker keeps going through uncertainty and adversity. Enjambment also creates a kind of suspension where we wait to see how the second line will not only complete the sense of the previous line, but also intensity. It look for instance how horror of the shade offers an intenser vision of this place of wrath and tears. Other times, the second stanza, and particularly in lines 11 and 12, the enjambment serves to highlight an opposition. The first line details an instance of adversity, and then the second line asserts how the speaker remains undaunted by the adversity. Notice how in this instance the speaker doesn't escape that adversity. For example, line 12 begins as the meanest of the years or finds the speaker or how on the page the speaker's bloody in line 8 is literary, under the beginnings of change in line 7, that is in German, help lyrically reflect the way in which the speaker asserts strength within constraint. Okay, the next one we are going to analysis of poetic device in Invictus. Although poetic devices are included in the literary device, they are exclusively used in poetry and not in prose. Some of the poetic devices used in this poem are analyzed below. First one, stanza. Stanza is a poetic form of some lines. In this poem, there are 4 stanzas and each stanza has 4 lines or verses. Quatrain. Quatrain is a 4-line stanza borrowed from Persian poetry. Here, each stanza is a quatrain because it's structured in 4 lines. Rhyme scheme. The poem follows the ABAB rhyme schemes, where the first line rhymes with the third and the second line rhymes with the fourth line. The rhyme scheme for the entire poem can be started as follows: A B A B, C D C D, E F E F, G H G H. The poem never deviates from these rhyme schemes, again emphasizing its stability and the speaker's steadfast strength. It does, however, employ an internal rhyme and some internal slant rhymes. The poem's internal rhyme comes in the first sentence of the last stanza in the first, straight the gate, with this rhyme of words that come one almost immediately after the others. Sound seems to limit itself, as if a narrowing like the gate it describes. The poem also contains slant rhymes in the words winds and circumstance, or change in beginnings and bloody in place and shade, unafraid and in matters and master. All these subtle rhymes work to show transformations and evolutions between these words. For instance, in the second stanza, bludgeonings led to one becoming bloody. This transformation parallels the same stanza's use of winds as the result of circumstance. Though, of course, the speaker also raised above the result. Okay, in the third stanza, place, which represents life, set the scene for the rhyming word shade and unafraid, each of which modifies the place. As for the shade, introduce the darkness of death that surrounds the place of life, and unafraid states that this darkness cannot daunt the speaker. Then, in the fourth stanza, the speaker's fearlessness becomes further intensified as matters transform into master. This transformation replaces negation, it matters not, with affirmation, I am the master, while also switching from the third person, it, to the first person, I, further emphasizing the speaker's self-control. Using these internal rhymes while being faithful to the overall rhyme schemes again emphasizes the speaker's self-control on one hand and expressiveness on the other. Next, iambic tetrameter. It means 4 iambic feet or 4 feet line that is having the da sound 4 times, or each one unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable, as in the first line of this poem, out of the night that covers me. Okay, the poem basically follows this method consistently except for a few careful variations which matches the speaker's self-possession. The first line displays both these qualities. Out of the night that covers me. The poem employs a touch for emphasis at the beginning to capture the feeling of the speaker emerging from night. A similar thing happens with line 2, perhaps stretching the intensity of the suffering from which the speaker emerged. Black as the pit, from pole to pole. After that, however, rather than continue to vary the meter, the poem falls back into a carefully controlled iambic patterns. It's also worth noting the poor stress of each line mirror the four lines of the stanza and four stanzas of the poem, thus adding to the poem's overall feeling of stability. The most metrically intense moments comes in line 12. Finds and shall find me unafraid. Here, the extra stress which creates a point in the second foot, followed by another touch in the third, serve to emphasize the speaker's willful attitude towards time. This line could also arguably be scanned as follows, with a spondi followed by an iamb, finds and shall find me unafraid. In either case, though the emphasis on shall find suggests the intensity of the speaker's faith in their own inner strength, it's not a question of whether or not a minute of the years will find the speaker again. It will, and the speaker will bloodily face it head on. After this, the poem returns to its stability in another moment of intensity. The final two lines both began with troches. First one, I am the mast of my faith. And the second one, I am the captain of my soul. This, however, only serves to mirror the poem's opening stress. Thus, the poem ends by emphasizing the speaker's willfulness, self-possession, and carefulness. Okay, the next one, quotation for usage from Invictus. In the stanza, in the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the blackenings of change, my head is bloody but unbuoyed. The following stanza can be used to describe the heroic action of a warrior who remains persistent even after an injury and continue to show his courage. These lines can also be used in speeches and lectures when sharing a traumatic past and the stories of overcoming them. Okay, the next one, symbol. For the symbol, in the first one, the soul. The soul is the most important symbol in Invictus and also the most ambiguous. It gets referenced twice in the poem at the beginning and end, thereby farming the poem and emphasizing its importance. Next, the scroll. On an early level, the scroll here can be taken as the legal documentation of one's punishment for a crime. We can think of all the instances in which a paper documentation seals one's fate, from ancient instances of exile to modern cases of eviction and criminal sentencing. Fate and fatalism is the central concept here. Symbolically, the potentially punishment-filled scroll reflects the inevitable hardships of life. Okay, next we are going to the vocabulary. The words are listed in the order in which they appear in the poem. First one, Invictus. Next, pit, fall, fell, circumstance, rat, shade, menace, straight, cat, scroll, and then the Latin translation of unconquerable. In the originally, this poem was an untitled section in a longer poem. The title was added later when the poem was reproduced on its own. In this way, the title can be thought of as a translation of the poem as a whole. Okay, next we are going to literary and historical context. In the literary context, Henley's work emerged during a time when writers were grappling with how individuals make meaning in the world where God's existence is uncertain. After publishing his in hospital the book that Invictus comes from, Henley would go on to have a long and influential literary career in London. The next one, historical context. In historical context, Henley wrote Invictus almost 20 years after Darwin published On the Origin of Species. In the intervening years, science had strongly shaken the foundation of Christianity. Many philosophies emerged to replace it. One such theory is social Darwinism, a theory that coincides with the rise of capitalism and seeks to apply evolutionary theory to human beings. The Romantic era, which preceded Henley, believed that individuals could find meaning in their lives by turning to nature. Okay, I think that's all about my explanation in the formalism stylistic analysis. I will make a conclude. In the conclusion, it can be stated that the poet has painted a very optimistic picture of the man who has suffered but kept his head high. This optimism shines when he says that he is thankful and his head is unbowed even though it bleeds. The use of this the use of this structural device has kept the meaning clear and effective. This short analysis shows that Henley has beautifully used literary device to make his poem impressive. The use of this literary device has not only made this text appealing but also opens up new dimensions for further interpretation. Okay, I think that's all for me about my explanation in the formalism stylistic analysis. Okay, thank you so much for your attention. See you. Bye bye.